Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I will call to order this Bloomington City Council meeting. Tonight is Monday, January 8th, 2024. Thanks to everyone joining us here in the council chambers, and thanks to everybody watching online. We're going to start our meeting, as we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you're able, please stand, remove your caps, and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Once again, thanks for everybody for being here tonight. Council, our first action this evening is the approval of the agenda. And our agenda it's basically a study session tonight. So it's a lot of information that we have. After we have a couple of introductory items. We have a proclamation regarding Martin Luther King Day. And then we're going to hear from our Planning Commission for their 2024 work plan. Our consent business is 19 items long. Councilmember Lohman has our consent business this evening. We do not have anything under number 4, hearings, resolutions, and ordinances. But under organizational business, we've got 5 different items. 5.1 is a consideration of a draft letter to the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners regarding the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center, that proposed closure. 5.2 is the draft presentation of the Penn Lake Management Framework. 5.3, another draft presentation on the electric vehicle infrastructure plan. 5.4, we have to make an appointment to the Port Authority, and we'll wrap up the meeting as we always do. Item 5.5, our City Council policy and issue update. Council, is there anything to add or any corrections to tonight's agenda? Hearing none, I would move approval of the agenda as stated.
Second.
Got a motion and a second by Councilmember Lohman to accept tonight's agenda as stated. No further council discussion at this time. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. And it's a good time to mention Councilmember Nelson is not with us this evening. He was not able to join us for a couple of reasons, so he's not participating virtually, and he's just not able to join us this evening. So, first item on our agenda is item 2.1, is a proclamation for Martin Luther King Day, and I'll head down to the podium to do it. As I'm sure you're all aware, next Monday, the 15th, is the observation of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 15th, 2024. And we have a proclamation recognizing that this evening, as we do each year on this day. It's Proclamation, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 15th, 2024. Whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the leader of the modern civil rights movement in the United States, was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. And whereas Dr. King devoted his life to advancing civil rights and public service. And whereas Dr. King's message evolved over time from one of basic civil rights, of voting and desegregation, to advancing labor rights, economic and social justice, and peace and dignity for all. And whereas Dr. King looked forward to the day when everyone would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And whereas Dr. King's dream continues to inspire our nation and is just as important today as it was in the 1960s. And whereas there are many goals that the City of Bloomington must realize in order to achieve the City Council's strategic priority of inclusion and equity for all residents. And whereas Dr. King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, and after 15 years of advocacy, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was signed into law in 1983 and was first celebrated as a federal holiday in 1986, but was not officially observed in all 50 states until the year 2000. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Tim Bussey, do hereby proclaim January 15th, 2024 as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and ask all community members in Bloomington to remember and reflect on the principles of racial equality and nonviolent social change espoused by Martin Luther King Jr., and to rededicate themselves to the philosophy that we can all share the dream for a better life, not only here in Bloomington, but also in the world. Dated this 8th day of January, 2024. As I said, this is an annual proclamation that we do, and it's one that I'm proud to read each and every year. Proud of the work that we do here in Bloomington regarding equity and inclusion, and proud of the work that our departments and our boards and commissions do with this type of thing in mind, with all of the work that they do. So next Monday, take a moment to reflect on it. It's a holiday in the middle of January, and it's one that I think sometimes gets overlooked by a lot of folks as to why we have a holiday so close to the other holidays, but it's one that it's an important one, and I hope you'll take a moment to look at to reflect on it. So, thank you very much. Item 2 on our agenda. Item 2.2 is the 2024 Planning Commission Work Plan. We have in our charter Responsibility Council to review the work plans of all of our boards and commissions, and we'll do that over the next few weeks. We'll be hearing from each of the boards and commissions about what they have planned and what they've got put together for 2024. And I see our Planning Commission Chair, Paige Roman, is here with us this evening. Good evening and welcome.
All right. Good evening. Paige Roman is Chair of the Planning Commission, as the Mayor mentioned, here with Nick Johnson, Senior Planner from the Planning Division. Thank you for the opportunity to share the Planning Commission's proposed work plan for the year. The Commission worked closely with staff to develop a plan that reflects not just the Planning Division's work for the year, but the goals of the Commission and the functions our body is tasked with overseeing. It was a new approach to work planning for us, and one that I think is healthy for an engaged and empowered commission, especially one like ours where a fair bit of our work is transactional in nature. Excuse me. We had a pretty busy year and saw a return to what felt to me like pre-pandemic levels of business. Some of our big items were advancing rezoning related to the Lyndale Avenue retrofit, robust discussion on the neighborhood traffic management plan, and a number of code amendments listed here, and several major developments, including multifamily housing projects, SIC Phase 2, and an exciting office to retail reuse in Southtown.
Yeah, so Mayor members, we're going to take a little bit different approach to this than we have in years past. Previous presentations kind of highlighted what the carryover projects were and what the new projects that'd be kind of fresh material for you. But given the emphasis of the Bloomington Tomorrow Together strategic plan and just kind of thinking about our projects in a different way, how they contribute to a healthy local environment overall, we thought we'd actually group our projects into some categories or buckets, if you will, to kind of think about how the work that the Planning Commission does kind of touches on the regulatory landscape, but also just impacts Bloomington residents and businesses in their daily lives. So we got 5 categories to kind of group our projects under: housing, business economy, transportation, environment, and continuous improvement.
There are some things that you will see that show up in multiple buckets, and so as you see them, they may overlap. In my 5.5 years on the commission, housing has been a big piece of our work. The Opportunity Housing Ordinance, the Just Deeds Initiative that we worked on with the Human Rights Commission, and work we've done with the AHRA to try and make progress on affordability. And yet there's still a lot to do. So some of these items are next steps and things that we've seen before, like single room occupancy standards and the RS1 zoning study. Some are overdue, like the South Loop District Plan update and short-term rental regulations. And there are some that are critically important, like our dated multifamily residential standards, but that may not be possible this year given evolving council priorities and staff capacity.
Yeah, so just touching briefly on the business and economy category here. So there's a number of different projects that we feel are going to be supportive of trying to help support a thriving local economy and give people the tools that they need to start a business here in Bloomington or to continue to have their business function well. A couple things we'll just highlight really quickly. The admin streamline approvals study. I think there's more growing support in regulatory environments to kind of cut some of the red tape or eliminate some of the barriers for businesses to get started. So I will highlight that one. Well, we do have some additional rezonings that we'll be bringing to you along Lyndale in support of the Lyndale retrofit plan. And then one thing that came out of your previous discussion on January 2nd is we heard discussion from council about ways to look at some of our standards that are more supportive of small business. And so one of the amendments you'll see tonight in our slides, it isn't reflected in the packet version, is to potentially swap a few projects for what we're calling small business code refinement. And so that could look at a variety of different things. We certainly welcome your feedback as to what it could look like, and I'll have a slide where we talk a little bit more about that.
Transportation is a big piece of our committee's charge, our commission's charge. The items here dig into our city's priorities and values around all modes of transportation. I personally am excited about the EV infrastructure plan and the livability of local streets, which both ask important directional questions. On EVs, how do we want to facilitate a transition, the electrification of transportation, but at the same time put some parameters around the necessary infrastructure? Regarding local streets, reconstructing them the same way we did in the 60s and the 70s means that these 50-year decisions are on autopilot. And so building on last year's neighborhood traffic work, the local streets project will ask, is what we're doing what we want to keep doing? Is our 20-plus-year-old streets policy aligned with our strategic plan, and does it facilitate our vision of a 21st century suburb? That's me too. Environment is, of course, and always should be, integrated into other areas of the plan. In addition to the topics we've already touched on, we expect to spend time looking at how landscapes are evolving, how we protect our natural environment, and how we can prepare for increased density to support future growth so that our infrastructure does not stifle development. There will be some exciting opportunities to collaborate with the Sustainability Commission here.
Yeah, just in the continuous improvement bucket, maybe this could also be a miscellaneous bucket, the ones that didn't fit neatly in all the other ones. But as a city, we always have things that we can get better at. Either these things are generated out of just, smooth operations, or just reflecting on improving just the organizational structure of our code, those types of things. So looking at an application fee study, we haven't done that in some time. And then looking at our park dedication standards, there's been some recent case law that warrant us to look at that, how we collect those fees related to park dedication. So getting to the timing and priority matrix, this was in your packet. This remains the same version that was in your packet, but basically most of you, and welcome to Councilmember Rivas, forgive me for forgetting to do that. What this document does is basically lay out the course of the year, and not only managing staff capacity, how we would deliver these projects, but also the capacity of the boards and commissions. Certainly, many of these things require public hearings, and so we can't lump all the things all on the same meeting. It just doesn't work well. So we have to do some strategic thinking about how to kind of lay it out over the course of the year, and thinking about both staff, planning commission, and council capacity. So that's our best attempt to do that. It also identifies some opportunities for collaboration with other boards and commissions, potentially. So this is what I alluded to earlier. So again, based on your discussion on January 2nd, we think that there might be some desire, and I welcome your feedback about this, to look at some of Bloomington's codes and processes as they relate to setting up new small businesses in Bloomington. And so one of the things for your consideration tonight would be a potential swap of adding this project. If you want to go in that direction, great, we welcome that feedback. If not, we'll follow, we'll march to the tune, so to speak. And what this potentially could include approval processes, looking at our indoor trash standards, odor control, how the city handles grease in our sanitary system, and looking at off-street parking requirements as well for certain business types. And then what I wanted to say is that we did do an estimation of how many hours we think this project would take. We think it would warrant some additional public engagement, so that's probably why the larger hour count in that regard. And then we're also putting forward, should you want to go in this direction, we kind of had a cap on, we hit our cap on the staff capacity with our initial version of the work plan. And so if you wanted to go in this direction, we did want to provide recommendations for potential projects to swap out in order to make capacity for it. Certainly there could be other projects as well. We would just certainly want to try and balance the hours associated with that. So with that, these questions are very similar to kind of what we've proposed in the past. It's removal or delay. Should any projects be removed or delayed from the work plan? Should any projects be added to the work plan? And then finally, should any projects be reprioritized according to the council's direction? So with that, we can stand for questions.
Thank you. Council questions? Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Yeah, thank you. First off, I'm sure, Nick, you looked right at me multiple times when you were talking about that slide, so thank you. I appreciate that very much. I was actually going to ask the question about whether or not we thought that we could, just given the fact that the the drive-through and pickup window thing was kind of a pandemic-related thing, and we're on the other side of that. We haven't really heard it. Might be a good candidate for us to go elsewhere with it at the time. But I had based on what you mentioned, I had a question for you about a couple of the items that are here. So the short-term rental regulations study, there are 215 hours still left in that project, but I thought we had done a decent amount of work before. Can you articulate for me a little bit more about what's left there, given it's a carryover?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember D'Alessandro, thanks for that question. So the bulk of the work that was done last year was doing all of kind of the research elements or components of the project. What's left to do is more that substantial engagement around it and then write the actual ordinances. And unlike some of our other zoning code updates that have more discrete, they're kind of just bound within the zoning code. That's one of those areas where the city might need to set up some other structure around it in terms of both with finance or other components if the city was looking to tax, for example, short-term rentals or do some of those things. So, or licensing, for example. So there's other elements to that. The hours are listed for planning staff, but unlike some other zoning code updates, that one involves other mechanics that is more cross-departmental and involves other things that typical zoning code updates do not.
Okay, and similarly, the SRO standards work, are we in that same place with that particular study?
Yes, we have done some, we've done a fair amount of initial research. We just need to reach back out. That was a project that got paused to collaborate with some of our sustainability folks on native landscaping and a little bit related to the state's cannabis legalization. So that was kind of just one where we just had to hit the pause button and start working collaboratively with some of our other departments.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it.
Council, additional questions? Councilmember Lohman?
First, a comment. I just want to thank you for redoing the presentation and setting it towards our new strategic planning piece. I think that's a great way of doing that. So in relation to that removal and the delay, my question that I have about that is the multifamily residential performance standards. I can't imagine that's being done in isolation. You know, we've got a couple of other things that have to do with residential things as well. By pushing that off a year, what kind of impact, do we have? I know we've got, the missing middle piece and that type of stuff. I would imagine there'd be some dialogue going on between those types of things. So.
There could. Mayor and Councilmember Lohman, thanks for asking about that because I intended to provide a little more background as to what informed our recommendation as to why we thought that potentially could be delayed. But one of the reasons that we identified that as a project, what we were going to look at with that one was the city's storage requirements, our open space requirements, some of those performance standards that carry with them for multifamily residential that are not contained within the opportunity housing ordinance. So it's really the zoning performance standards that we have. That we've gotten feedback from the development community on and just wanted to study. So one of the reasons that we're comfortable delaying that or putting that forward is that we still have the tools of PD flexibility and other ways to kind of address some of those things on a situational basis. And so that's why we were comfortable going in that direction for that project.
Okay. I just thought you would do those things kind of together, and you may see some things going along there. Just want to create additional work. I don't think I want to add anything else additional to this, to your second thing, because I think there's enough already there. Of course, I have many ideas, but I think we'll just stick with the ones we've already got there. And in terms of reprioritization, I think I wouldn't dare try to, move that stuff around because I know that things are kind of stuck together. So I appreciate what you've done there.
Council, additional questions? Specific questions or specific responses to the questions on the screen here? I mean, I'll chime in. I like the suggestion that you made regarding the small business standards. We have been talking about that, and I think it's something that probably should be moved up in the priority list. I do think, given all that we're doing and the work especially around our small business development center, and as this ties into other things as well, and I've noticed the on the list here the neighborhood commercial nodes. I mean, it all ties into that as well. So I think looking at that and looking at the work that's underway and the work that community development I know is taking on regarding these things, I think that should probably be an addition to this work plan, and I would defer to the commission and to staff about what should come out. But I think that's definitely, those should be definitely priorities as we head into 24.
Thank you for the feedback, Mayor.
Councilmember D'Alessandro?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm very excited about that, and I say that for two reasons. One, because I've been yelling about it, I guess. Sorry about that, but also because we have a real opportunity. I feel like we're seeing this convergence of some pretty cool stuff with the development center and the commercial nodes and the some of the accelerator stuff, like with Hatch Bloomington, for example, and all that kind of stuff that we're going to, what I'd love, wouldn't it be great if we were able to get I'm making this up, a new, young restaurateur to come in, open up a wine bar, that we helped them work through very quickly, that we also provided some funding for, to accelerate that, to help them buy a grease trap or help them buy something that they need for their place or whatever, and then it opens in a shorter amount of time than we've ever done it before. I mean, those are the kinds of things that these movements do to kind of get to that streamlined space. And I'm not saying it has to happen in the next 3 months, but doing this work alongside the work that the rest of the community development organization is doing, I think would be very advantageous as we think about the possibility of then accelerating that through Hatch and other functions. So I'd be very supportive. I was going to recommend that we delay on the pickup window thing, like I said anyway, so I certainly think that's one that we could push off. I don't know about the rest of council, but I feel like that's fine. And in terms of the I think what was the other one that you had recommended? The multifamily residential standards, like you said, if you feel like, and I'll defer to Planning Commission as well, if you feel like that is something that, we've obviously built a lot of residential multifamily, so it's not like it's in the way at the moment of us getting there, especially with our opportunity housing ordinance that we have. So these seem like good candidates, so I appreciate you recommending them. I would be for this swap. Thanks.
I think one of the things that Mayor and Council that you mentioned, and that is the small business standards and the overlap, whether it's with one of the things we had on the list that we've been talking about for a while, and the commission, is our parking, which is, we are generally way over parked. And then the pickup drive-through standard it's on here as a subtraction candidate, but for the commission, if we think about this small business standards review as a lens by which to look at these other things, then it is still a big item, but it also then it's a framing piece for us as we tackle these other things.
Council, anything additional here? Council, so I think given the discussion here and what we have directed, I think I'd look for a motion to approve the 2024 Planning Commission work plan with the suggested addition and subtraction as outlined by the council. Is that clear enough to make it?
Mayor, I'm comfortable.
We're comfortable with that?
I assume the city attorney is okay with it.
She would
with
have
the
thrown something.
legislative record that we showed here on the slide.
All right. So,
if you wanted to reference a slide number, you could say slide 10.
fair enough. Fair enough.
Thank you.
So, council, look for a motion to approve the 2024 Planning Commission work plan with changes outlined on slide 10. But with the bulk, the rest of the plan is attached in the packet.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Councilmember Carter, second by Councilmember D'Alessandro to approve the 2024 Planning Commission work plan as stated. No further council discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. Mr. Johnson, thank you. Chair Roman, thank you much. Thanks for your work on this and your leadership of the Planning Commission over the last couple of years. Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Happy New Year.
Next on our agenda is our consent business. As I mentioned earlier, we've got 19 items on our consent agenda this evening, and Councilmember Lohman has tonight's consent business. Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got holds on 3.4, 3.5. Are there any other holds? Seeing none, I'll make a motion to approve 3.1 through 3.3, and then 3.6 through 3.19.
Motion by Councilmember Lohman, second by Councilmember Mua to accept tonight's council consent agenda as stated. No further council discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Item 3.4, Councilmember Lohman.
Mayor, Councilmember Rivas has held that item, which is type 1 preliminary.
That's thank you. It's been held. That's what we're talking about it now. That's the idea of holding it. We take it out of the consent business, and we'll have the discussion now. And we're going to bring up the questions that have been brought forward and try to answer some of those questions before we decide to either carry it over or vote it up or down.
That's okay. We just didn't see the number that fast. It doesn't show it on our paperwork.
So, yep.
So, Mayor, this one here is a type 1 preliminary and final plat of Gopher Way local at 9111 Columbus Avenue South. And Councilmember Rivas.
Based on the feedback of the constituents in the area, as you know, I have lacked the experience to speak eloquently about this, but I was moved to try to hold the motion to learn more about it, because I cannot give the constituency information they need from me, as I don't know the details of it. So based on that, I decided to ask if it could be held over so that we can gather more information and provide it to the public.
Thank you, Councilmember Rivas. I think that's it might be something we want to do. I would want to outline which questions we want to answer, because I have heard questions about exactly what we're talking about here and how it's going to be divided, and if it's going to be multifamily or single family, or those type of questions. And I think it does need to be clarified to make it.
Sure. Specifically, the concern of the phone calls and emails that I got were related to their concern to the fact that the entire area could be transformed into one lot with two different houses in them. So that's mainly the concern. I would say that 90% of the information, the feedback I got was just related to that, and I cannot, in good conscience, give him an answer that's not the case, because I don't have that kind of information available to me at this time. So basically, that's the question they have in mind. That at least the people that contacted me, they want to know whether the entire area has been zoned to absorb the type of buildings that specific lot is being stated for.
Thank you, Councilmember Rivas. Mr. Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. On this item, Mr. Keel, our Public Works Director, is listed as the presenter because my understanding is the proposed lot split meets all city requirements and the platting process and the fees have been followed. I see Carl is coming up, but I also know that Mr. Markegard, our planning manager, is also available to speak to some of the land use issues as well.
Thank you, Mr. Verbrugge. Mr. Keel and Mr. Markegard, welcome. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mayor and Council. As Jamie had noted, this item is a land division by Plat. And what platting is there's a kind of a two-step process for subdividing land. It's a formal process for subdividing land. Preliminary plat kind of looks at what the contours are of the lot, where it's served from roads, et cetera, and all the details. And then the final plat is a much simpler drawing that basically shows exactly how the lots are laid out when they're finally done and when they get recorded with the county. The city's review on these types of plats is to review them with regard to the contents of the plat itself, all the details about what shows on the drawings, et cetera, and also to review them for conformance with city code. And as was noted, this lot is large enough that it can be subdivided into two separate lots, and each of those separate lots meets the minimum requirements in the city code. And so based on the review of the technical aspects of the plat and the review with city code, it was found that it is conformance with city code and with our requirements, so we're recommending approval of that. My understanding is, this land is zoned R1, and that the lots meet the requirements of the residential lot standards, and that the use of those lots can be anything that's allowed in the R1 zoning district. And to the details of that, I'm glad Glenn's here. He can speak more eloquently about what's included and what types of development can occur on these two new lots.
Thank you, Mr. Keel. Mr. Markegard, so two 60-foot lots in an R1 district. What would be possible there?
Yes, that's correct, Mayor. A little bit of background on this lot. It's been vacant since 2008, or at least that era. There was a house on it previously. In 2008, the City Council approved a plan for a two-family dwelling on the lot. However, that never moved forward. Tonight, the applicant's proposing to divide it into two 60-foot wide lots, which do meet the zoning standards as they were amended back in May. The surrounding lots to the south are also 120-foot wide lots. To the north are generally 75-foot wide lots. So this would be closer in size to the parcels to the north and to the south.
Thank you, Mr. Markegard. And under the zoning code that we adopted, the 60-foot lot is the minimum size, correct, for a single-family home that we adopted. I don't even know when it was, within the past year or so, year or 18 months. We adopted that as the
Who made that decision to be a 60-foot lot? These were all listed as single-family home residence land back in the day, since the 60s and 70s and 80s. Where did it come about that we made this change, that we could split these lots like this?
That was the question for folks who didn't hear that, and it's a good question. When was that decision made to reduce the lot size for single-family homes to 60 feet? Mr. Verbrugge, help me on our timeline here, or Mr. Markegard, help me on my timeline here. We had no, I appreciate it. We want to make sure your questions are answered here. We had an extensive city discussion, a council discussion on this over the course of 5 meetings, I think, about zoning, about minimum lot sizes, the opportunity to create more buildable lots in the city of Bloomington, and how we wanted this all to work. And the minimum lot size of 60 feet was decided upon by the city council after, as I said, I think 4 or 5 discussions, 4 or 5 meetings. And what was the timeline on that, Mr. Markegard?
Mayor Bussey, that was adopted in May of 2023.
May of 2023. So within the past year, we made that decision.
Who made that decision?
You're looking at the people that made that decision. It was a decision by the city council.
See, Mayor,
Yes.
just a question for decorum. Is there a possibility that we want to, I'm just nervous about, so I kind of look to you, Mayor.
I appreciate that,
Yeah.
Councilmember Lohman. Why don't we take the opportunity to not open a public hearing here, but a public comment opportunity on this? If the council will oblige that, I would like to open a public comment so we can have folks ask questions and answer questions to the best of our ability here. Or the other option that Ms. Manderscheid, I think, is going to offer me here is we could possibly delay this until a further meeting and set this up with an opportunity for it and post it so everybody has an opportunity to speak on this. Ms. Manderscheid?
Mayor, members, yes, I think that staff does have more information that might be helpful for people that are present to hear, and then perhaps staff could talk with them out in the hallway and answer some more specific questions if there are some more technical questions. And then if the council would like to lay it over to a subsequent meeting, if the timing of it all is possible to do that, then you could proceed there and take action at a subsequent meeting if the timing allows for that on the 60-day rule.
Mr. Verbrugge, I know I saw an email from you here about the decision ticker, how it expires. And
Mr. Mayor, my understanding is the agency timeline for decision on this is January 20th. However, we do have a 60-day extension that is available to us. So if the council would like to set a date certain, upcoming meetings would be January 29th, February 12th, or February 26th that would meet that timeline.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for cleaning that up for me just a bit. Councilmember D'Alessandro?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Quick question. Obviously, I want to make sure that the public is able to provide some comment, but I also want to be careful that we don't put ourselves in a situation very similar to where we've been before, which is that we have the information laid out in front of us, and I can't come up with a reason not to approve this given the facts. And are we going to be in that place 60 days from now when we delay this, and all we've done is really given people the impression that we can make a different decision when we can't make a different decision? And I want to be sure that we're clear about what we're doing. And I also want to respect the fact that we have people here who want to speak to this. So how are we going to balance those two things without getting ourselves in a weird situation?
I appreciate that, Councilmember D'Alessandro, and share your concerns there. I do think we we can do this, and I would like to answer the residents' questions and have that opportunity. And if we have to delay it until the 29th of this month, with the understanding that it's an opportunity to help clarify and answer some questions regarding this. But I agree with you, the facts and the requirements and our zoning code and so on basically has one answer applied to this. And if we don't answer in that way, we're going to end up in court again. And we don't want to do that. And so I think if it's that understanding that we delay this, if we lay this over until the 29th, allow for an opportunity for staff and the members of the public with questions to talk and to answer the questions, and then bring this back on the 29th for a final vote, with the understanding, as I said, that vote, based on the facts and based on the information we have in front of us, can go one way, but at least it will give an opportunity for staff to explain this to our residents in a little bit more depth.
Mayor and council members, can I ask one more thing?
Why don't we save this? If you could talk to the
I
council.
have the property company here right now, and I need to ask this.
Those are city staff.
Oh,
Those are city staff
the
members.
people that own the property are not here then?
I'm not sure. Right now, we've got the city staff in front of us. If you have questions of the property owners, maybe this would be best to take this out into the lobby and have that conversation there.
Are the property landowners of 9111 here?
I don't know if the landowners are here. No.
That's what I'm
So-
getting at.
So,
I keep chasing it around.
so council, I would look for a motion to lay this over until date certain of January 29th or January 29th meeting, with the option and the opportunity here for staff to interact a bit more with the residents and answer some questions that they might have.
Mayor, that'd be
Mr.
moved.
Mayor, if I may, I think the question just bits around the fact that the public wants to know whether the entire area has been zoned for the lots to be in a possible future divided into two lots, because based on this picture that I'm looking at, most of the lots to the south are 120 feet or about.
Or
Wide?
75 by 130.
The 75 by 130 are the two across the street on Columbus Avenue, still on the northwest part of the lot. And the directly north of the lot, there are three or so parcels that are 75 feet or so, based on the information I had gotten today. So the question that was being referred to me was whether the entire area had been zoned for that purpose. And if that's the case,
The whole city has.
the whole city has,
Correct.
is that
The entirety of the R1 zone in the city of Bloomington was
Thank you.
redone.
So
So
basically-
it's not just this area, it's the entire city.
Thank you,
So
Council.
basically, that answers the question that was being asked of me. If that is the case, I mean, we can just put it that way. It is the entire city that has been zoned that way.
So I'm sorry, we're not going to do it this way, okay? If you have a question, I'd prefer you ask the staff, you speak with the staff. Council, I'm going to move that we lay this over until January 29th.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second to lay this over until January 29th, to give staff and the residents an opportunity to get together, to talk a little bit more, maybe to talk to the developer or the current owners who are selling, and just to understand this a little bit better and understand the details behind it. And I understand it can be,
So nobody would talk to me. That's why I'm here.
and that's why we're having this opportunity. I don't know who you tried to talk to, but we have this opportunity now that you can talk with staff and they can answer any and all questions that you might have. Council, any additional discussion on this? We've got a motion and a second to lay item 3.4, which is a type 1 preliminary and final plat of Gopher Way located at 9111 Columbus Avenue South. To lay this over until January the 29th. No further council discussion on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. So take the opportunity to have this conversation with staff, and staff, if you wanted to even head out into the lobby, or oh, you got to stick around for the next one. Okay. after we talk about the next one, then we'll take this out into the lobby. So.
Okay.
So, Councilmember Lohman, I'm in 3.5.
Yep. Councilmember D'Alessandro has held this one.
Thank you, Councilmember Lohman, Mr. Mayor. Was interested in, so thank you first off to Mr. Centenario for sending me an updated diagram of this particular thing. I was confused as to what was happening there. This made things a lot more clear to me. So a couple of questions for you, Mr. Markegard. Number one, the existing house looks like it's going to get expanded. So there's not a demolition. So we are actually talking about this lot being split, one to be a lot and the other to be a house to be expanded and sold or whatever. Is that correct?
Mayor Bussey, Councilmember D'Alessandro, that's correct. The front lot along Maple Avenue would be available for sale.
And this this driveway that is noted here in orange on this slide, it isn't going to change, but there was some concern about the landlocked nature of the, I'm assuming it's the is that the the eastern property, right then? The one that's closest to 9 Mile Creek?
Mayor Bussey, Councilmember D'Alessandro, correct. The western lot, which is adjacent to 9 Mile Creek, or on the left of the screen, right now has no frontage on the street. Back in the 1970s, City Council approved a variance to allow that condition. So this, while it does not remedy it fully under the zoning code, it does provide at least some street frontage to Maple Avenue south, and then creates another code-compliant lot adjacent to it.
And is that, so that's already existing, so there's no new, there's no change to the existing variance related to the driveway then? Do I have that right?
Mayor Bussey, Councilmember D'Alessandro, the driveway location is not changing, and the setback would not be changing either.
Okay. Which of the properties would be responsible for the portion of the driveway that is essentially adjacent to the future lot? Or is that not relevant to us in terms of planning?
Mayor Bussey, Councilmember D'Alessandro, there would be a joint agreement between the two lot owners in terms of maintenance of that driveway going forward.
Okay. And that is something that we don't normally get involved in?
Mayor Bussey, Councilmember D'Alessandro, the city does get involved in so far as we review that and make sure that there's one in place, but the details of that agreement we don't dictate.
Is that did we define that as a requirement for this particular variance, that's in place?
Mayor Bussey, Councilmember, I would need to look back through the conditions, but that is a typical requirement and a code standard.
Okay. I didn't see the conditions in our, did anybody else see them? I apologize, Mr. Mayor. I didn't see the conditions for this one like we had for the prior one, so I wasn't sure if we had or not. Okay. The only other comment that was made in here that I wanted to address was, do we have conditions on the requirements related to flood mitigation and other things for 9 Mile Creek? My concern being, Mr. Mayor, that we have a new project to do 9 Mile Creek restoration and erosion control and everything else, and it sounds like this particular property there are some concerns with it being I don't know if it's the divided nature of it or is it the amount of, with the expansion, how much non-permeable surface there is or whatever, but the flood easement problem that was noted in the packet, do we have conditions on this property for that as well, is my question, because I didn't see them in the packet.
Yeah, Mayor Bussey, Councilmember D'Alessandro, there are code requirements in place that restrict any new structure from being built or expanded within the floodway or floodplain.
Okay, so from your perspective, those concerns have been allayed?
Correct.
I don't have anything else. It was mostly just clarifications on the diagram and questions. I'm happy to move it if that's what we want to do at this point.
Council, anyone have any additional questions on this? Comments? Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thanks very much, Mr. Markegard. So I'll move to adopt a resolution approving variances to reduce lot width from 60 feet to 14 feet to provide frontage to a parcel without frontage and reduce the side yard setback for an existing driveway from 5 feet to 0 feet, 9940 Maple Avenue South.
Motion by Councilmember D'Alessandro, second by Councilmember Mua to accept item 3.5 on our consent business as stated. No further council discussion on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Markegard. Appreciate the information on the last two items. And thank you, Councilmember Lohman, for taking on the consent agenda tonight. As I mentioned when we talked about our agenda, we have nothing under item 4, our hearings, resolutions, and ordinances. And that will move us on to item 5, our organizational business. And the first part of our organizational business is item 5.1, consideration of a draft letter to the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners regarding Hennepin Energy Recovery Center closure proposal. Laura Horner and Elaine Bialis are here this evening. Good evening, and welcome. Ellen, excuse me. Ellen.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I am Laura Horner, the Solid Waste Program Coordinator for the City of Bloomington. Joining me is Ellen Bialis, the Deputy Director of Public Works, and Carl Keel, the Director of Public Works. And we're here this evening to share a draft letter regarding the Hennepin, that will be sent to the Hennepin County Board regarding their plans for the closure of the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center, also known as HERC. So as you may recall, on December 4th, we presented information to council about a recent action taken by the board to direct county staff to develop a plan and recommendations by February 1st of 2024 for the closure of HERC between 2028 and 2040. And as a part of that action, the county board directed their staff to send materials from the board briefings on HERC to mayors and city council members of the cities that use HERC and seek feedback on this proposed plan. They requested that the responses be returned to the county board no later than January 15th of 2024. So at our discussion with council in December, council directed staff to prepare a draft response to that board action based on conversations that were held that evening and returned to council for further review. So we are here tonight to share that draft response with you. The materials from the county board, our December 4th presentation and that draft letter were included in materials for your review tonight. However, we thought it would be helpful to share a few key points in the letter as you consider the draft this evening. So at the end of our presentation, we'll seek a formal action by council to forward the comments to the county board. So in the proposed letter, Bloomington's commitment to environmental stewardship and zero waste is highlighted. However, the draft letter does express our concerns about the timeline the county board has established for closing HERC. Hennepin County staff have indicated that a closure of HERC before an 85% recycling rate is achieved would have serious environmental and financial consequences for county residents. As we discussed with council in December, the likelihood of reaching an 85% diversion in the timeline laid out by the county is unrealistic. Reaching that benchmark would make Hennepin County actually one of the highest performing jurisdictions in the world to achieve an 85% recycling rate, which given our current recycling rate is not realistic to meet in that timeline. So the letter describes our efforts over the past 10 years to reduce solid waste and shares that our current diversion rate is approximately 38%, which is right in line with Hennepin County cities. And Bloomington and the county as a whole will seriously struggle to meet an 85% diversion before 2040. The letter then goes on to share that to reach that 85% goal, cities would need additional time and significantly more resources directed at waste diversion and reduction. Hennepin County's Zero Waste Plan was adopted earlier in 2023. It highlights several actions that cities would need to undertake to reach zero waste goals. The actions are not small activities. The list includes program changes such as organizing multifamily solid waste collection, like we have for residential, as well as organizing commercial recycling. In addition, the Zero Waste Plan has actions for strict enforcement of our recycling mandates, so strict mandates for participation in all recycling and organics recycling programs. So the full list of suggested city actions we have estimated would likely require at least 10 to 15 years of program development and implementation. Bloomington would need more staff members and financial resources to complete the list of tasks. And at this point, the county has not yet identified a source for these resources. So as we discussed with council in December, the closure of HERC without meeting zero waste benchmarks would result in Hennepin, or in Bloomington's waste needing to go outside of the county for disposal, and would mean that this material would be landfilled. The draft letter indicates our concerns about this direction and the potential environmental consequences that would flow from this increased landfilling. In addition, from the increase in the transportation of materials, the vehicle emissions, and the loss of electricity currently generated by non-fossil fuel sources. Concern is also expressed in the letter about the loss of funds from HERC that currently support Hennepin County's other environmental programming. The draft letter goes on to recognize that the county board is considering this response to address environmental justice concerns raised by neighborhoods surrounding the facility. However, the draft letter expresses concern for other environmental justice communities both within the county and beyond. It does not appear that the county has considered the environmental impacts of adding additional semi-trailer traffic and landfilling materials on additional neighborhoods beyond those adjacent to HERC, where the materials would end up. The letter suggests a county approach that has more regional and a data-driven approach to the responsible management of solid waste and HERC's future. It reminds the board that HERC is a region-wide asset and that planning for its future should involve all stakeholders and not be rushed in the matter of a few months. It offers Bloomington support, again, for a zero waste future and partnership with the county to make that happen. And the draft letter, the letter further suggests some areas of planning and review that we recommend be taken before a closure of HERC is considered. And this includes an environmental impact study, a review of the environmental justice impacts that will result from the closure of HERC, as well as with the continued operation of HERC, a review of the financial impacts of the closure, an identification of additional resources to develop waste reduction and diversion programs, and a closure timeline that is contingent on meeting the necessary benchmarks outlined by Hennepin County staff to avoid the environmental and financial consequences of a premature closure. So in summary, the draft letter, again, summarizes Bloomington's concern about the recent board actions, and it encourages the board to provide adequate time and resources for communities to transition away from the use of HERC. It to engage communities in realistic planning for HERC's future and avoid rushing to decisions which may exacerbate the environmental and financial impacts of managing waste throughout the county. And it does further indicate and reiterate Bloomington's willingness to partner with the county to reach zero waste goals. So this was a review of our draft letter that has been provided to you. And as a reminder, the board is looking for these responses from affected cities by January 15th. And a suggested motion is in the request for council action and here on the screen today. So at this time, we would invite any questions or feedback on the letter.
Well, thank you for this, and thanks for pulling this letter together based on the concerns that you heard the council make, but also very practical concerns around this as well. I think you did a very nice job of pulling them all together. The most obvious being the financial impacts, the extended environmental justice impacts, and honestly, the lack of a plan. If we want to get to 85%, well, what's the plan? Creating a crisis, I don't think, is the plan. There's got to be something else, and not just from the recycling end, but I think from the packaging and the production end as well. So without those plans in place, I agree completely that this is a poor plan, a poor idea, and I appreciate that you've so eloquently put it into a letter for us to send on to the Hennepin County Commissioners. Councilmember Carter?
Thank you, Mayor. So echo your sentiments. I think you guys did a really excellent job incorporating information that you already had and then the conversation that we had last time. And also doing it in a way that, again, signifies partnership and wanting to work together, but also firmness that, we have some serious concerns. And so excellent job. And I also really love the recommendation to do an environmental impact study on the closure of HERC. I don't think we had talked about that last time, and that addition makes a ton of sense, and I don't know why anyone would argue against that. So just really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the planning that you all have done. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
Councilmember D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if anyone can answer this question for me or not, but my understanding was that there was a little bit of like state-related, county-related back and forth happening. So in the documentation, for example, it was indicated that there was going to be money to pursue
The digester?
Yep, the digester. Anaerobic, that was the word I was stuck on, sorry. I'm like, the opposite of Olivia Newton-John. No, I don't know. Anaerobic and digester. And so, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's amazing what you have to go through sometimes. But that the state said, oh, sure, happy to give you that money, but you have to close the HERC. And then now the county has said, we're not actually going to do the digester project. So if that whole stalemate, if you will, is now over and done with, does anybody know what if any other state-related items were behind the press on this at the county level? No? Okay.
Mayor,
Any ideas, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that another piece of that was changes in legislation in the last session that have now no longer count the energy generated from HERC as renewable energy. It used to always be counted as that, and as it's sold to Excel, that could be part of Excel's renewable energy standards. So there was a pretty large push to stop calling waste to energy a renewable energy source, which kind of kick-started some opposition to waste to energy in general.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Okay, I think you did a great job. I would agree that hopefully we can get a environmental impact statement for the decision, behind the decision, which I don't think we have, and an environmental impact statement for what this causes our communities if we don't have another option for it. So I think that that's really great. Happy to sign on in opposition to this, Mr. Mayor. Thanks.
Happy to sign in opposition to the HERC, not to the left, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Sorry,
just wanted
happy to
clarify
sign
that.
this letter, which is in opposition to the.
HERC. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you. Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank staff for their hard work that they have done with this. I have a question, and then a brief comment. How much time do you think is needed to get to this 85% goal? Or when is, another way to ask this question, when would you suggest that it makes sense to close the HERC, given the requirements that are needed in order to get to that goal?
Mayor, council member, the Hennepin County Zero Waste Plan does identify a timeline of 2040 for an 85% diversion. But again, that's with the understanding that that would make the county one of the highest performing jurisdictions in the world if all 62 of the actions within that plan are completed successfully. So the county staff's recommendation for a closure of HERC, that timeline is between 2040 and 2050. And with the conditions that 85% diversion rate be met. So there are certainly a lot of actions that could be taken to help get us to a very aggressive waste diversion rate. But again, that would take a lot of additional resources and programming to make that happen.
Well, again, I want to thank staff. I'm about 75% there on this, but I will not this evening be supporting this. I think it's interesting that this is to be submitted on Martin Luther King Jr. Day's birthday. There's certainly some historical things that are there, and I don't want to get into a big argument. Again, I think staff has done a wonderful job of putting this together and getting us to where we're at today. But I'll leave it at that.
Additional questions, Council?
If I may.
Councilmember Rivas.
I understand where Councilmember Loma is coming from. It is one of those hard decisions to make. However, in my involvement with sustainability in the past, I have visited numerous landfills, and I think that will make shutting down HERCs will make it a lot worse than what it is right now. And until the county or the state or all the cities involved with the county come up with a plan to replace HERC, in spite of the fact that I do agree with the emotions with that, you know, I've had the same mentality also, but at the same time, if we don't have anything to replace HERC, I will be voting for it because to be against it because of the fact that we don't have any plan to replace it, and that makes things worse for whoever lives in the area as well. But I do sympathize with where Councilman Member Lohman comes from because I understand what happens in those areas. But I do believe that if it gets shut down, it'll make things a lot worse than what they are at the moment.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Carter.
Oh, you know, I wanted to echo those sentiments. I'm guessing that most of us up here understand just kind of the historical nature of redlining and the impact on communities of color, and the fact that many communities were intentionally, you know, zoned into industrial areas or right by industrial areas. What I do think is interesting about the HERC specifically is that it was actually, that location was chosen because it was an industrial area and people did not live close by. And then I'm guessing the city of Minneapolis changed their zoning and allowed residential units to be built next to the HERC, creating this problem that we have today. So I also sympathize and I feel for the neighborhood. It also is infuriating from a policy perspective, and I think the additional environmental justice issues that are going to be created by this closure, if it's done too early, will just magnify. There are going to be so many unintended consequences and magnify the inequities that exist. So I just wanted to put that out there to acknowledge the local community and also point to the fact that there have been some policy issues that really helped create this problem.
Agreed, Councilmember. Councilmember Muap.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the biggest frustration for me is just the lack of communication from Hennepin County. I understand we're under their jurisdiction. I understand that they have big, broad goals that they want to reach, but it comes down to the conversation with constituents to understand how we can all work together. So I want to thank staff for taking the opportunity to put in the fact that Bloomington has been moving forward with these. We are a leader in this area. When we started the organic recycling program, that was ahead of Hennepin County. So the things we are doing are above and beyond what Hennepin County has already done. And so I appreciate that we're putting in very clearly that it's not that we're against this. It's that we need time to fully understand the impacts and what we have to do to achieve these goals. And without that time, you put us in a big crisis, which puts us 3 steps back. And so I appreciate that we've taken the time to put this letter together, and that by supporting this, we are letting Hennepin County know where we stand, how we feel, and how it's going to impact our residents who are their residents. And so thank you for putting this together.
Councilmember Lohman, anything else to add?
Yeah, I do want to. I didn't want to respond because I didn't want to have this kind of back and forth piece, but I think I want to just make a couple of comments. One of the things that would have been nice in this is to acknowledge those historical pieces. Part of the things that we did when we gathered together, Mayor, to be a part of our strategic plan was to talk about equity and inclusion. And granted, this is not in Bloomington, and I want to say that, but where there's injustice or things happening in other places, I think we have to acknowledge that. And yes, in a vacuum, and granted, there were policy decisions that were made and that type of thing that were out there that impacted those types of things. But I think it's important for us, if we're going to continue to be a leader when it comes to environmental justice, that that we're also taking into account those communities that are placed in that particular place. I applaud the Hennepin County commissioners for taking such a bold move of supporting this thing, even though it's a very difficult thing for us to have to go through. The history of racism in this country is of one that is, it's there. And we cannot ignore that. We've had many situations in the Twin Cities metropolitan area where we have been examples of things that have happened. And I'd like us to continue to find ways. And I know this council, and so I'm not saying by voting for this, I want to make that really clear, is not supporting that. I'm totally not saying that at all. But I just want to take an additional step here to be absolutely clear, given the history of Bloomington when it comes to these types of things, external to this and other things that have happened in the past. I want to just be sure that I make that statement, and I think it is fully and completely appropriate that my colleagues vote for this and support this moving forward. So I'm not trying to say anything at all in terms of, and I think you should support this because of what this implication means for that. But I do want to acknowledge the fact that I think it was not lost on me that the comments are due on Martin Luther King Day and the importance of making sure that all human beings are treated as equals, and that's all I want to say here tonight. And I'm not trying to get you to change it or put that in the draft, but I think we've got to acknowledge the historical pieces that are a part of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I appreciate your comments. I do, and understand where you're coming from. And I also can't overlook the irony of the January 15th date, because no mail will be delivered and the Hennepin County offices will not be open on that day. But that's enough said about that. So, Council, if there are no more comments, I would look for some action on this so we can move along in our agenda. Councilmember Mua.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd be happy to make that. I'd move to transmit the attached letter regarding the planned closure of the HERC to the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners by the requested January 15th, 2024 timeline for input.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Mua, second by Councilmember Carter, to transmit the attached letter regarding the planned closure of the HERC to the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners. No further council discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 5-1 with Councilmember Lohman in opposition. Thank you much. Appreciate it. And Council, thanks for the discussion on that. Well done. Moving on to item 5.2, draft presentation of our Penn Lake Management Framework. We've got Brian Greedle and Jack Distel from our water world here to talk to us this evening. Good evening. Welcome.
Hello. Wait on mic here. All right. Mayor Bussey, council members, thank you for having us here today. My name's Jack Distel, and I am the city's water resources specialist.
And I am Brian Greedle. I am the Water Resources Manager.
We're here today going to present on the Penn Lake Management Framework. So the Penn Lake Management Framework, our goal ultimately is going to be to have you all as the council vote to approve the management framework, whereupon that would replace the existing Lower Penn Lake Management Plan. That vote is scheduled, hopefully, for the January 29th council meeting. Today, we want to explain the management framework. It's a unique plan. If I could summarize it briefly, it's basically a plan that sets forward centralized goals, make Penn Lake healthy, and then devises a strategy that reoccurs that will follow to get a path to reach those goals. My presentation today is basically going to be exactly how the framework works and why it works that way. The problems that plague Penn Lake are not unique to shallow water lakes. It's very common. High nutrient loads, algal blooms, flashy watersheds, salt, common carp, the list goes on. Unfortunately for Penn Lake, those problems are not new, nor are the city's attempts to resolve those issues new. The first management plan for Penn Lake was done in 1970s. The most recent one was adopted in 2010. Neither of those plans succeeded in meeting the improvements in water quality that we had hoped. But there was another few big things that happened since the 2010 plan that have come up and have changed management strategies for Penn Lake. One big one is that just the technology, the standards and procedures for shallow lake management have come a long way just in that 15 years. It's pretty significant. The other, and this is probably more important, is in 2018, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency listed Penn Lake as an impaired water for nutrients. In 2020, as part of that impairment, they set a standard to the city of Bloomington that we need to reduce the load of nutrients going into Penn Lake by 40%, which is significant. That's big. And we can all agree, city of Bloomington has set high standards for reaching good ecosystem health across the city. But that impairment listing designation has created a legal obligation for the city to reduce that nutrient load going into Penn. The third big thing that happened, of course, was you hired me. And I joined in 2020, just about that same time as the nutrient allocation. And one of my first tasks was to kind of try to figure out how we could meet the MPCA's regulatory requirements, meet the city's high standards for ecosystem management, and community expectations, which are rightfully very high for this area. So the primary difference between the previous Penn Lake plans and the one that we are proposing is the inclusion of adaptive management. And adaptive management is kind of the industry standard nowadays. And it's pretty simple on its face. Basically, you come up with a plan of attack, you execute that plan of attack, and you check in to see what happened based off of your actions. And ecosystems are dynamic things. Rarely do they react exactly how you want them to. And so whatever the realized results are, you come up with a new plan of attack, and the cycle repeats itself. So for those who've been on the council for a while, you've probably seen some ecosystem management plans come through, or maybe in your own backgrounds you've seen them. A lot of times there'll be kind of short-term transformative goals in there, like, get rid of all the buckthorn out of the forest, and then you have a buckthorn-free forest. But if you know, and it's in the reality, ecosystem management never ends. It's a forever thing. And you're familiar with this in your own lives. A good example is, why does a turf grass lawn stay a turf grass lawn? Because you mow it twice a month. And you can't stop, because if you stop, it will quickly turn into something different. And so that mowing in that example is an example of ecosystem reinforcement. But now you have a problem, because how do you create a forever plan? You can't come up with a management strategy for every possible scenario that could befall Penn Lake. It's too complicated. And this is where the city staff, we kind of got creative about it. Because what we chose to do is, instead of focusing a management plan on specific actions that could be executed to help manage Penn Lake, we decided to focus the plan on the process of planning for those management actions. It's structured in this way. So by adopting the city management framework, what we'll be adopting is a standardized approach that was repeating every 5 years, that will create a document that has a prioritized list of action items that can be taken in that time frame based on the conditions of the lake, community interaction, and everything set forth by the framework standards. this is the value of adaptive management, because it's a repeating process that also has no end. And it will allow ecosystem managers like myself and Brian to keep pace with the ecosystems under our care. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's similar to how the city will take a comprehensive plan, and then that will lead to consecutive capital improvement projects based off that plan. The framework, in this sense, that we'll be adopting, it's going to be the guide that we're following to try to reach that goal of a healthy lake. And in that repeating process, we have this, it's giving us a path to get to that goal. And because of that, what we're calling the main document that contains those management priorities is the management pathway. It's a path to get to those goals. The management pathway, it's basically just a list of prioritized action steps that can be taken in the 5 years. And all of that's kind of formulated based off of the structure of the management framework that will be what is adopted by the council. But there are two really important clarifications I want to make on the pathway. The first is that it won't come before City Council. So while we're adopting the framework, that standardized approach, the management pathways in the future are going to be certified by the city engineer. You will see in the council packet that we have completed the first management pathway for this round, and it gives you an idea of like what it looks like, the information it contains, where it will go in the future. But in future years, the city engineer will look at it and it'll say basically, yes, this was done based off the standards that were adopted by the city council that are contained within the management framework. And that's kind of that process of certification for it. The second main thing we need to note is that the management action items that are included in the pathways are there only because of their intended impact on reaching the goals set by the framework, that Healthy Penn Lake. They are not finalized projects. If a project is selected out of that pathway to be implemented in the real world, it will go through the standard city CIP process. And if there's grants involved, if the amount of money and coming forward and community involvement for those specific projects will continue to occur. But the other cool thing about this is, even though it's just a list of priorities, the management pathways also contain a lot of narrative. The manager is doing it will write in kind of why those decisions were made, the information that led to those decisions. And they're going to be connected to the management framework. So every time a new management pathway is created, it's going to be added onto the framework in its compendium. That's how they're connected. The compendium will also contain, if there's a biotic assessment that's done, it will contain if there's engineering analysis that are done. This is the cool thing about the framework, in that over time, it's designed to become more valuable, in that it starts to accumulate this information and this storyline of how management has progressed and how the lake has reacted to it. So for example, say in 30 years, we hire a new water resource specialist. They have no connection to either of us. Well, on their docket is management of Penn Lake in whatever state it's in. They can pick up the management framework. They have that standardized approach that we all agree upon. But they also have 5 management pathways that they can now read through and see how management has adapted to the lake. This will then account for changes in management strategy, climate change, community expectations, land use, you name it. It just keeps it fresh every single time. So that's the framework. It's basically just a standardized approach that has these management pathways every 5 years. It's redone every single time that will refer back to and come up with a strategy for managing the lake itself and get this adaptive approach. And I know in this presentation, it's a lot, but I'm keeping it kind of short. I didn't get into much detail about exactly how the framework does this. A lot of that gets a little heavy in the ecological management theory behind it. But one thing I did want to start to highlight is one of the critical aspects of the framework, and that's the human component. So From the beginning of creating the management framework, our water resources team has put an emphasis on community interactions. We knew it for it to be successful that the framework itself had to have community input, but also that the framework would promote ongoing community input in perpetuity. So how we came up with the framework, this kicked off in end of 2021. In early 2022, we created the Penn Lake Management Plan City of Let's Talk Bloomington page. It's still active. It's still up there. It's still one of our main ways to interact with the public. Since March of 2023, it's had 1,200 community views on there. But we also didn't want to stop just at an online interface. Our goal is to really create some community connection there. So our main first goal of doing that was we hosted a community event, the Penn Lake Celebration event. We hosted it at the Penn Lake boat launch. We sent out postcards to the sub-watershed, put it up on Let's Talk Bloomington in the briefing and social media. We had upwards of about 150 plus people attend that event. And at the event, we had like city strategies that we're currently doing to improve water quality. We had some ecology about shallow lakes. But mainly the idea was that we would have the community come together and celebrate the lake, and have that be the main connection point where we can then move forward with deciding how we're going to go about doing better management. One of my favorite outcomes of that event was community stories. They're in the appendix of the management pathway, and you can read through those. A lot of them, there's some cool ones where like community elders talking about when they're growing up around Penn Lake a long time ago and their memories there. But from that Penn Lake community event and some surveys that were put on Let's Talk Bloomington, we found that the community was very interested in having a community group that would be more involved in making some of the decisions and formulating the framework. So we created the Penn Lake Community Group, the PLGC for short. That is still active. It has about 22 members right now. People can join whenever they want. They just have to put their name in on the listserv. And that group helped be a lot more hands-on. So we held in-person meetings with them. We met with the watershed district. They helped review comments on the pathway and framework. At the end of it all, the framework and pathway had about 52 public comments. We have a list of those comments. We'll have those in the next presentation. You can read through every comment and the city's response to those comments. And through that, we came up with the framework that you see today and the pathway that's associated with it. The next big thing is how the framework does community involvement in the long term. So at a minimum, the framework requires community involvement every single time the framework is, or the pathway is rewritten, so every 5 years. We have a full year to write a pathway, and that was basically done that way to give enough time for the community members to have a say in what was going on. And that initial step, it'll drive a lot of the priorities that are set forth. So like if birding is a big priority, we can say, well, we should put more emphasis on improving local bird habitat or something like that. But it also should give an opportunity for ongoing community interaction. So that Penn Lake Community Group can be involved in helping plan and implement some management strategies that are volunteer run, like trash pickups. It could be like community science events. The options are endless, but the main point is that in every step of the way, community is going to be involved again and again. So it's revisiting the human aspect of it. And so, yeah, that is the community, the Penn Lake framework in a nutshell. This standardized process and procedure, that's what we'll be voting on. Connected to it are the management pathways and all that other information. I can open up for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Distel. Council questions? Oh, an otter, look at that.
I saw 2 otter on Adelman Pond 2 years ago, which is right next to Penn Lake, so they're out there.
Very cool. Councilmember D'Alessandro and then Councilmember Lohman. Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for all your work, folks. Appreciate it. Obviously, it's always kind of a challenge to talk about a way by which we're going to plan a way to plan. So I know that that's a challenge and it can get complicated pretty quickly. So my first question is, I'm number one, I'm grateful that you have the Penn Lake community folks now. I think that's a nice addition to the work. Mr. Mayor, I would like to know, did the first pathway, this first 5-year, 6-year pathway that you have, 2024 to 2030, did that group provide input to you on that? It feels like the timeline for when the final review of the framework got done was like third quarter of last year, I guess it was. I'm just kind of curious what the timeline was, and if do we have community input into the actual pathway here?
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember D'Alessandro. Great question. A little bit of a weird timeline with this first one. The answer is yes. The community was involved in reviewing the pathway. It became a little bit more complicated because we were asking them to review 2 documents. In the future, it would be that the framework's done. They wouldn't have to deal with that. And that's kind of a little bit more complicated in like how the theory of it's sorted out. And they could just focus on the pathway. But with all the community involvement that we had at every step, we were taking account of those, the exact same procedures that we would be doing in the framework itself that would lead to it. If you vote to certify the framework, it won't be also approving that pathway.
Understood.
We would go through that same process and make sure that we're all good with it. And it's that one's a 6-year pathway only, so we would get on a rotation of every like the 05s. Yeah. So yes, there was community involvement there, but it made it more difficult in that there was then 2 documents they had to review, and we had to try to split their time looking at those.
Thank you for that. That makes sense. And so it sounds like there's another opportunity for community input into the actual pathway, because we're not approving that right now. We're just approving the framework. And then you said it may not come back to us. The framework itself may not come back to us, but you'll go through the community engagement process with that you've defined. Is that right?
Yeah. And in the pathway, we basically tried to do it exactly how it would be done in the future. So we have all the community metrics about exactly how we took community feedback in there. It's all listed in the pathway itself and described in the community interaction section of it. So the Penn Lake Community Group will probably be our main outlet for that. And if they want to put a pause on that, we will put a pause on it and try to get to a different outcome of whatever that is. But again, I think the big takeaway is that yes, the framework is what will be approved, not the pathway. The pathways then in the future are just this ongoing thing. And the idea is that the city engineer is certifying that it was met the same standards as was set forward in the framework.
Okay, so a follow-up question on that then, if I may, Mr. Mayor. So when we think about the pathway itself and we're able to describe the particular set of activities that are included in that particular pathway, I'm assuming I'm going to get this right by saying those are the particular actions in that period of time that we're going to take and review.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, because they're not guaranteed to happen. There's too much on there for it to all happen, and especially like infrastructure projects. We'll list like 5, and maybe 1 will, because you have to budget for them. Maybe a grant might pop up, so you have to give it a little bit flexible. In future pathways, there's going to be a lot of carryover, so they'll kind of evolve over time.
Mayor and Councilmember D'Alessandro, I think I would comment that the pathway, as it's described, is more or less like kind of like a work plan for staff to work off. And then if we're going to develop projects and things off that pathway, then those would continue to follow the similar CIP and all that and budgeting process that we go through for other projects.
Right. Okay, that was my question. So the question is really about priority then. So for example, if you have, the carp mitigation project and you have that against the phosphorus mitigation project, how are you going? What is the process that this framework enables for you to decide which one should happen first or second? I mean, realizing that there's 90, not 1 or 2, but how does the framework help you define which one should be done first, second, 9th, whatever? Or maybe I should say,
the main way it does that is this. It's a conceptual ecological model. So the idea with any of these ecosystems is that You have to make a decision. We follow this flow chart. Reason I left out is because it's kind of complicated.
It's okay.
And we also have a task flow chart in there. So we have community expectations, priorities, standards. We have the ecology of the lake, and then we have just what tasks are work together on themselves. And then you have staff decisions about where's the money, how can you budget it, what's going to be the best bang for our buck.
Okay, so if you don't mind, if I could use a real world example to try to frame this up. So if I'm thinking about the carp mitigation problem, for example, because fish are fun, so you have these competing issues. You have, on one hand, you have people like to fish, and maybe they will catch carp, and that's okay with them because they like to fish. That's a community thing, right? There's the ecological thing, which is we have resident eagles on Penn Lake, and they like to eat fish, and carp could be among their choice of food, right? So you have that ecological thing. You also have the fact that there's an invasive species that you're dealing with, which is carp, and carp mitigation is something that the DNR is funding right now, and so you could get some money for that if you did the eradication. Is that what you mean when you're talking about like the kinds of things you'll pull together to make your staffing decision, the staff decisions? Are those good real world examples of the kinds of things that fall under these areas of review?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember, yes, that's a great example. At that point, you were making a decision on, is this the right time to do it based off of the real world considerations?
Okay, so for each of those things, we would expect some level of community participation based on the framework that says, what do you like to do here? What's important to you? What are you getting out of this thing being there or whatever? And go from there.
Yes, Mayor, Councilmember, yes, those expectations would be set forward. Like if sport fishing was a big one, then that would influence our decisions.
Right. Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. This is my second time seeing this, and every time I see this, I get even a bigger smile because one of the things I like most about this is the flexibility, and just if we look at the history of this area and some of the things that were done there and how we're trying to work through this, I think this really represents a just kind of a combination of many of the things that we as a council have been trying to do around engagement and just the creativity that's kind of been placed in this and various parts of how this has been placed in here, and then just how it's dealing with environmental how do we best deal with this, using scientific fact to drive decision making. And I just want to just say, and the council member here has already said, just thank you for bringing this unique process forward. I'm just really excited to see what this is going to look like and what type of policy this is going to yield in the future. And I hope to see that we do this type of stuff with other things that we do. So I'm just thank you for your hard work here that you've done here, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing the goodness that's going to come of this. So thank you.
Councilmember Mua.
Thank you, Mayor. I will echo that. I think Penn Lake deserves to be a shining gem in our city. I park there frequently, eat my lunch, and observe the wildlife that is there in the summers. My feedback, I guess I would provide as well, especially when we're doing the community engagement. When I look at slides like this, it is confusing. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm having a very hard time, even just understanding that. And there's other, other PowerPoints and other things we have in here that can easily get lost, especially to the person who's just like, I live here, I just want to know what's going on. And so that would be my input, is that as we're going through and soliciting the feedback and getting neighbors' input, like, we need to make sure that it's understandable that we're keeping these internal because you understand what's going on, but making it so that regular people every day can actually provide input without feeling like they're taking a PhD class.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, Councilmember, yes.
Thank you, Councilmember. That's good feedback. Know your audience, basically. Bottom line, know your audience.
Just real quickly.
Very quickly, Councilmember.
Jack, do we have a way for people who might want to get involved in that Penn Lake community could you describe how they get in on the fun, if you will?
Yep, Mayor, Councilmember. The Let's Talk Bloomington page is our main ability for that, and all they have to do is just submit their email, and I add it to the listserv.
Very good. Council, any additional feedback? If not, We don't have any action required on this. We're just listening in and appreciate the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 5.3 on our agenda is another presentation of a draft document. This is regarding our electric vehicle infrastructure plan. Brian Hansen is here. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, thank you. I can't promise I'm going to have as many colorful slides as Jack just had, but we have some good stuff for you here. So thank you again. I'm here this evening to talk about the electric vehicle infrastructure plan. We have a draft plan together right now. I'm joined tonight by Mark Gallagher with SRF Engineering. I'll just give a quick background on kind of the plan and how we got to where we are today. Staff was tasked with putting together an electric vehicle infrastructure plan. This plan is intended to be a comprehensive evaluation of the electric vehicle infrastructure in the city. So to date, we've had kind of a piecemeal implementation of electric vehicle infrastructure. So we didn't really have a comprehensive plan looking at how we're doing it holistically as a city. So that's kind of what the intent of this plan was. Like I mentioned, a roadmap to kind of move forward and how we can do this in a coordinated fashion. And also the hope this plan is available to identify the action items, leverage the plan to take advantage of funding opportunities that may be available for electric vehicle infrastructure in the future, and also helping to coordinate this work with other CIP projects as we move forward. So just a little quick background. Staff put out an RFP for a consultant to help with this plan in late 2022. We received 7 proposals. SRF was awarded the contract, and we began work in March 2023. So we've taken this draft plan to the Sustainability Commission and Planning Commission already. You're the last body to hear this. And then following tonight, we hope to go back to those boards, or those commissions, excuse me, and then back before you at the end of January with a final plan for your consideration of adoption. So Mark's going to have a short presentation here. We'll open it up for questions and discussion following Mark's presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark Gallagher with SRF.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Gallagher.
Mayor, councilors, I'd like to treat this as concisely as possible in terms of a presentation, because we do have some items at the end that we would like to have some discussion on. There will be more opportunity, obviously, to do that. Slide.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
I'll drive.
If only I were paying attention. Quick overview of what I like to talk about. Very quick introduction into kind of who we are, what we do, an overview of the project itself, some of the processes we followed. Brief discussion of the draft summary. There's a lot of stuff in there, so we don't have the opportunity here to treat it in detail. At the end, where we talk about schedule and next steps, then we do have some items that we do want to discuss with the council. I always like to give acknowledgement to my team. I'm the project manager here, but Ash Nararian is a sustainable transportation manager at SRF. He provided a lot of input and a lot of the horsepower behind this. And John O'Callgill is the manager of our public engagement, and he really sort of conceived of and brought us through the public engagement part of the planning process. So first question, why do you need an EV infrastructure plan? And I've worked with a couple of different clients now, and this is a question that comes up right away. People are out there buying cars. They figure out how to get them charged. What do you need a plan for at a governmental level? So the answer to that is, number one, it is part of an overall climate and energy plan. And lots of cities do different things that way. There is the is it Energy Action Plan. Is that I always get those titles mixed up. There was also the Climate Emergency Declaration. So this is something that is part of that overall structure that various governments, in particular City of Bloomington, engage with. Because it will invariably involve at some level government interaction with the infrastructure deployment, considerations of equity need to be thought of beforehand, and then policies constructed to address those as electric vehicles and the infrastructure to support them become more and more prevalent. Chargers may actually be on city property, and we have an example right in the parking lot over here. I believe there's a couple of charge points. That is increasingly the case, and there are a few even state parks where the DNR has allowed chargers to be installed and you can use them free. That needs to happen in an orderly fashion. Then there's this other question of what happens with the city fleet itself. As electric vehicles become more prevalent, how do those become part of the operations fleet that the city uses, maintains? What do you need for vehicles? Which ones are appropriate? How do you manage charging of those? There's sign and design standards. If you allow these things onto city property, what do you do with signing? What do you need for design? If you allow them on, for example, curbsides, what are your setback requirements? What's the relationship to other furniture out there? In fact, lastly, there's a question of residential deployment. What happens in multifamily equity? People who don't have garages, that don't have a dedicated parking spot. What is the responsibility and what can the city do about that? So with those questions, we came up with a set of outcomes. What do we want to get out of this plan? Number one is we need to assess the current conditions. It's the old adage, if you don't know where you are, you can't figure out how you're going to go somewhere. You have to know where you're starting. If you have big fans of the Stargate movie or TV series, point of origin is critical. Also, whatever happens is it needs to reflect the stakeholder priorities. Why people use or don't use electric vehicles, and what do they want from the city to facilitate that use and that choice? Where are the areas that the city can do something? What are the levers that can be pulled? What is the deployment of infrastructure? What does that mean? And perhaps even more importantly, what is the regulatory and administrative and decision-making process behind doing things with infrastructure? And that brings us to the ultimate outcome, the roadmap for next steps. Where do we go from here? I mentioned equity, and equity is always a little bit of a challenge because there is no single good metric for equity. But here's an example of the sorts of things that the plan is going to talk about is the geographic distribution of these. And this shows you very quickly and very clearly a bit of a mismatch between where's an underserved community out there, and I think this is defined under J40. One of the various standards there is where those purple areas come from, and where do chargers exist? And we don't have an even distribution there. So one of the questions is an even distribution addressing equity? And if so, how do we encourage the charger infrastructure to be deployed in these areas so it properly serves all populations within the city? So that's the sort of thing that we think about with equity. It turned out that planning for things like this is a very, very expansive topic. And so in order to get our hands around it, we needed to define the limits. What's inbounds, what's not inbound in this plan. And in doing so, we came up with this set, these 5, what we eventually called domains of planning. Number 1, fleet electrification. What is the city going to do or not do with its own vehicles? How is it going to charge them if it deploys electric vehicles? Number 2, public charging. If the city is going to provide access to charging on city property, what are the policies needed to do that? Where do those things really end up going? Private and commercial charging. In multifamily housing or in commercial parking lots, what set of rules does the city need to have in place to facilitate that? Make sure it is safe, make sure it is accessible, make sure to the extent you can it addresses equity issues out there. Charging readiness is really about 2 kinds of infrastructure. Number 1 is the actual physical infrastructure. As we're doing capital improvements, are there make-ready things that we can think about to ultimately facilitate deployments? For example, if we are resurfacing or otherwise reconstructing parking areas in a city park, we don't immediately have a plan to put chargers there, but can we do things with infrastructure to ultimately make that more cost-effective and facilitate that? Secondly, there's the question of administrative infrastructure. Do we need to think about permitting inspection? Do we need to create portals that consolidate information, make it easier to get a permit to install one of these things, be it a private citizen or a commercial? And lastly, charging design. If we are going to have these things out in the world, particularly if they're on city property, how do they complement the built environment? How do they interact with that environment? How do we make it easy to find and use these? What happens if you have to plow snow and you block access to a charger? All of those kind of minutia details that really address usability. So in terms of the overall process here, as Brian mentioned, we're coming to the end. We've had a draft plan for a few weeks now. It's already passed through a couple of commission reviews. We're in the process now of revising that plan, and we should be wrapping this entire process up toward the end of the month. The next steps are going back in front of the Sustainability Commission. That's happening on the 16th. After that, on the 18th, it goes back in front of the Planning Commission as a draft final, and then we come back to this group on the 29th. So, quick overview of our first draft goals. And then after that, as I mentioned, we want to have some discussion with the group. We've created some kind of prompting questions. For our 5 domains, I won't read these all out because everybody can read it better than I can speak. But you can see that for each of these, for fleet of electrification, we had a goal. Things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions, simplifying the fueling and maintenance processes, all of those sorts of things that speak to the real advantages of electric vehicles. Similar sorts of goals with public charging, getting greenhouse gas emissions down. Again, fitting with the Energy Action Plan, the Climate Emergency Declaration, all of those sorts of things really kind of meld together with this plan, and this plan provides the framework for setting policies, picking locations, all of those sorts of things. So those are the goals that we came up with working through public input, working through staff during research. And those led us to some big questions. The policy things that are really decisions that are going to be made really by you moving forward. And there are many more questions that can be discussed, but they came up with about 6 things in the internal discussions working with Brian's staff here that one way or another are going to need to be addressed. For example, what about installation at curbsides? There isn't a lot of curbside or parking in Bloomington. Is this something that really needs to be addressed here? Or is it really just in city parking facilities? How can the city ensure equitable access? That's a big question. You know, what are the mechanisms that are available? As I keep saying, what are the levers you can pull to steer this boat one way or another? What should we have for goals? Again, we can see that we don't see a lot of chargers in underserved communities, but what should the goal be? A completely uniform geographic distribution across the city is probably not realistic just because of the realities of geography. So what is that goal? What does the city really desire to have there? If we are going to deploy these on city property, what are the financial partnerships and what are the legal implications of doing so? What are the agreements that are going to be agreeable to the city to engage in these sorts of partnerships? Are there special considerations for permitting chargers? The same way that 5G microcells brought up some novel permitting and construction. Does there need to be a revision here? And then lastly, and we heard this earlier this evening, the consequences for zoning and land use, things like that. Is it okay to have a pay-per-use charger in a given location, particularly if it's a residential location, those sorts of things. So again, those are the big policy questions that are a little bit beyond the scope of a plan like this to address. And so that is the quick and dirty overview of the EV plan. With that, I'll open it up for questions for Brian or myself.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to echo Mark's comments, and I'm really excited by the plan. Like I said, we've been working on this for going on 10 months now, and to see the actionable items that are listed in here, some of those short, medium, and long-term actions. Thinking about actually taking those next steps to actually start to develop those strategies is very exciting for us. So I'm hopeful that we can get this finalized and start to get hit the ground and start to put some real work into this. So happy to take any questions or feedback at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Gallagher, I appreciate it. Why don't you, if you could back up one slide. Yep. Just had a comment on that, just looking at this. It would strike me that there are specific things. How can the city ensure equitable access, special considerations for permitting charges? We're not necessarily plowing new ground here. There are cities with this type of stuff, this plan in place already. And I think it would be helpful in a lot of ways to take a look at what's been successful elsewhere. Rather than allowing the 7 of us to throw out ideas and then trip over each other and trip over bad suggestions, there's got to be at least a guidepost for us to aim toward or agree or disagree with. And I think there's probably, it would shorten our discussion time considerably in terms of how we get from A to Z here, right?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. And as Mark mentioned, this is each one of these buckets or these 5 kind of concepts could be their own plan in themselves. So this is a really complex issue the more we dive into it. So what Mark and his team have done a good job of is kind of identifying these are the action items. These are kind of the areas we need to focus on. And then as staff, we need to kind of start to dig into those. So from my opinion, I think one of the biggest questions that we'll need to answer as a city is on the public side, where do we see where do we see charging infrastructure moving forward? Do we want to encourage and allow curbside charging, or do we want to focus, as Mark said, on public facilities? Or, I know that in we had discussions with user groups. There's a faith community. There's a group of faith communities that are really interested in sustainability things. And one of the things that they offered was, they're interested in installing chargers in their parking lots. A lot of these churches and faith communities are located in residential areas, and is there an opportunity to utilize some of that area? So I think one of the first questions that we'll need to come back to this council and as staff provide you guys with some opportunities to comment on is what is the best place to have these chargers in the public infrastructure, or the public rights of way, and do we want to do that as a city?
Got it. Understood, and that makes sense. For my 2 cents, I don't know that curbside is the best idea, but again, I don't know if there's a city that's doing a curbside and it works just fine for them. It seems to make more sense that parking lots off the flow of traffic seems to make more sense from a safety standpoint more than anything. It's not just parking and getting in and out of your car. It's a matter of what side you've parked on, and if it's, if the charger on your vehicle is on the side of the charger, the curbside, or however it would work. It just seems to me it would make sense. It would make less sense to do a curbside than it would be to an off-street parking lot. That being said, you say city parking lots here. I'm intrigued by the notion of charging stations in nonprofits or faith communities or private businesses who would like to offer that, if not to their employees during the workday, to others after hours. That kind of thing. And so I think we could be creative with that and take a look at possible ways to work through that. Council, thoughts on this? Councilmember D'Alessandro, why did I know you were going to have thoughts on this?
This is like my favorite meeting. I mean, everything I wanted to ever talk about. Water nerd, electric nerd. No, you guys are great. Thank you for pulling this together. I had 3 things. By the way, Mr. Mayor, New York City has curbside parking. That's EV charging. So if they can do it, I feel like we can. But that's because I think something like 50% of the residents that have cars have to store them on the curb, which may not be our situation, right? So it's worth looking into. I was going to recommend 2 pieces of data to add to your thoughts here. One is I don't see anywhere, maybe you have it and I just didn't see it, what the body of electric vehicles in Bloomington is. What residents have them? Can you plot which residents have them and overlay that on your map of all the other equity questions you have? Because if I have an electric vehicle and I'm charging it at my house, which is 80% of the time what people do, that's one piece of the puzzle, but where am I going, right, within Bloomington, where I might also want to charge my car? So I don't know if we know who has an electric vehicle and who doesn't, but maybe that's information you could get. I certainly would provide it. I have one, so that's great. And then the second thing I had was I was excited to see that you have a near-term question related to e-bikes here. I highly recommend that we include biking in our planning here for 2 reasons. One, our Parks and Rec team, I know they're thinking about making sure that we have enough biking infrastructure at our parks as we do our parks master plan. What a great way to combine those things, right? If I have an e-bike, I go to a park, I can charge my bike while I'm at the park. I think that's a real selling point, and I think people will benefit from it. It is also an accessibility issue, right? Somebody older like me or somebody with mobility issues who is using an e-bike as opposed to because they want that mobility assistance can get benefit from it, right? So you'll be checking a box, if you will, around looking at that from a disability equity perspective. And so I was excited to see that. And then the second question that I guess I have is when we talk about chargers, the truth is, like, private enterprises are already doing some stuff in Bloomington, right? So I think that's probably where the big 12 is, down there at the Target parking lot at Penn and American, right? So, the open question for them is like, why did they do it that way? Why did they choose, I think they use ChargePoint, why did they do that, et cetera, and what are those things? So I would be very interested in understanding who has distributed these things and who's using what, right? Walmart tends to go with, I forget what the name of that place is. Is it Electrify America, I think is the Walmart people, right? So Walmart goes there, Target goes ChargePoint. Is this an actual like commercial thing? Are we having like breakdowns of like private enterprises like partnering to create some kind of differentiation and that kind of thing? If so, how do we ride that wave, not necessarily get in the way of that per se, but ride that wave and enable them to do that for us, that kind of thing. So that would be the other place I would recommend. But otherwise, I'm super excited to be seeing this and can't wait for me to be able to park my car in more places in Bloomington. Absolutely. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Mua, and then Councilmember Loman.
Thank you, Mayor. I would echo Councilmember D'Alessandro's point about private industry. I think personally at this point in time, the reliance on private industry to sort out the bugs is where I would rather see us go, and then follow behind and support as it comes up, right? Because as I think about how automobiles came to popularity, it was private industry that really solved the issues of the day of roads and gas stations and how do you maintain these things. And so I don't think it's the role of the city to necessarily be the one directing it, but seeing what comes and then allowing those things to progress based on the best practices. And then the second thing I'm concerned about, and what I also want to understand as well, if you could explain more about the review process of this, because as electric vehicles continue to develop and innovate, things are going to change, and they change very rapidly. I mean, right now there's only like less than 1% of cars being sold as EVs, according to JD Power. I just looked that up. Mm-hmm. And so as that develops and that purchasing increases, how do we stay on top of this to make sure that we're meeting the needs as vehicles come down in price, so that we're not caught standing still as these things change rapidly, and then we're catching up?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember. I think that's a good question. I think that kind of relates back. I'm thinking about Jack's slide about kind of his implementation. Check out the assess how it's working, go back and do that. And I could see that being part of this plan as well. Maybe going back and coming back in 5 years, looking at the plan, seeing what's been implemented, seeing the changes in the industry, bringing back, making adjustments to that, addendums to the plan, modifying the plan as needed to make sure that we are leading and on the cutting edge. So I think that's a good point. I'm going to put that down right now, because I think that's important, that this plan is developed in this time frame right here. But as you said, the technology is rapidly developing, so we don't want to be stuck, 5 years back when things have changed and we haven't caught up with it. So I think that's a good point. Thank you for that.
One more question I had, specifically around, is there an opportunity to add even just language for other possible options, right? Electric is the option right now. But if you look on the West Coast, hydrogen's still a thing that they're trying to develop. What other sustainable alternatives could possibly come out and overtake electric as the main source of new vehicles? And so is there opportunity to include the ability to switch and adopt kind of the same policies to support whatever it does end up becoming?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember, I think that's a good point as well. When the RFP was sent out and what Mark was tasked with, we were focused on the electric vehicle infrastructure. But I know that comment has come up previously about different, fuel sources and how can we adapt that. So I think for this plan, it's focused on the electric vehicle infrastructure, but I think moving forward that we could adapt the plan and maybe look at more of an alternative fuel infrastructure plan and adapt that as, the markets shift. And if we see new fuel sources, rise in popularity and, being used more readily throughout the city, then we can adopt the plan as needed. So I think that's a good suggestion as well. And I could see that happening during that 5-year cycle, kind of just making sure we update it and keep this current.
For whatever it's worth, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was still in college, I was a big car guy, and so I wrote a lot of papers for my instructors about them. And we did, even back then, look at hydrogen as a possibility. And quick background, my education is in environmental economics, so that's what I was into, and I'm happy to be coming back to it now so many years later. But at that point, we were actually talking about hydrogen combustion as opposed to fuel cell stuff, things like that. In terms of it becoming a prevalent technology, you see it in Japan, you see it in California. That is largely due to the availability in the climate. For hydrogen fuel cells, primary exhaust is liquid water, which when it is 15 below becomes a real problem managing that. You don't want cars dumping water all over the street. Hydrogen combustion is probably not going to be a big thing just because of the nature of management of that. We also looked at things like high-speed flywheels, compressed gas, compressed air propulsion. It's fair to say that at least over a 5-year period, electric vehicles is going to be the focus. There are some interesting battery technologies which are just now being commercialized, though, that I think are going to change the complexion of what is needed for infrastructure. Things like graphene sulfur batteries, Light and Company makes them. If you're doubling or tripling your energy density, the charging infrastructure you need to support that becomes different. And I think that is likely to be the focus of monitoring technological change over time.
Mr. Mayor,
if you could, just one moment, Councilmember Rivas. Councilmember Lohman's next in the queue here. Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you. I'm just going to pick up right where you left off. I was going to go a different spot, but I have a note here, and we talked about this when it came before the Sustainability Commission, so I'm glad to hear that another council member has got the same kind of thinking. And the way that I've kind of written this up is the obsolescence of infrastructure due to innovation. And that's one of the things that I am very concerned about, as we look at this plan. And I think that, what you have put forward, Mayor, at the outset of this is kind of where I'm kind of moving in the direction of, are there other cities, and I know we talked about that too over the weekend and stuff, so I don't want to steal your thunder, and I'll let that go. But I'd be very interested in what the mayor has brought forward, kind of here's a template that we could look at and then kind of work down through that to see, whether we want to be, ahead of those things or behind those things. So then with also that being said, and I know this may not be here, this is maybe more for you, one way to look at equity is in terms of where our current gas infrastructure is, and maybe looking to try to make rules in which we, either severely, limit, when you get ready to do something, you've got to add in, this infrastructure. And I don't know what the laws are around that or what the impacts are, of trying to put, this electric piece right around gas. I mean, imagine that can't be a great combo. But where those places have become, in a sense, obsolete, we're no longer going to use that gas there, that we, take that over and make sure that the new infrastructure is placed in that same location, so that we kind of look at our zoning rules or look at how in which we do that to make sure that there is a distribution across the city of these things, and then also maybe looking at, hey, if we want to encourage people to try to use this electrification, maybe we ought to look at how we currently use the legacy forms of gas.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councilmember Rivas.
I just want to say it is a great idea. I think as a city we do need to plan on the infrastructure for electric vehicles. We might not believe that it's going to take 5-10 years for all of us to drive electric vehicles. However, if we fall behind in the planning stages of it, we're going to find ourselves not having the opportunity to just tap into the existing technology within the city. But at the same time, the costs, I mean, I love the idea, but the cost is kind of prohibited. I mean, and I'm assuming that you have already studied all of that. Again, the equity part of it, how can the city actually decide on that? Even after all these studies, if most of the vehicles are not affordable for a certain amount of the population, whether it's the city, the state, the county, or the country as a whole. So there are a lot of large implications in the whole plan. But I do like the idea that we need to be planning ahead. I mean, I had the pleasure of driving an electric vehicle for a while, and I gave it up because I sometimes drive more than 400 miles in one shot, and I had to spend 3 hours to charge it, and I gave it up. You know, but at least I wish I had one to move around the city. It's practical for that. I use my motorcycle instead, but I mean, it has its uses, at least for now. But I do believe that it's a great plan. I mean, you have put a lot of work into it. As I was mentioning to Councilmember Lohman, there is technology out there, and I also had the opportunity to sit on a car that uses magnets to move. I mean, that was amazing. No sound at all. I mean, it was just unbelievable. A lot of power, but electric is the way to go, I guess. It's the only safe way to do it. Hydrogen, the water, you explained it. There's no way it's going to work in Minnesota or Wisconsin or anywhere in the Midwest. I think it's a sound plan. I can only imagine the cost of it. I don't, but you do have a better idea than I do in regards to that. But the city does need something for the future, though. That said, it's just going to be a lot of work. But it's awesome to know that this is being planned. It's needed. And I think that's the way that we're moving electric as much as I don't understand it. I have a lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask them today. The batteries, where are we going to put the batteries that get damaged and all that stuff comes to mind, but that's for another day. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Rivas.
Thank you, Councilman. And if you have questions, my email address is included in the presentation. Please ask. I probably don't know, but I know people who know, and I will get you an answer.
Yeah. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, thank you. The information included in this plan and this report is incredible, and it's also a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I guess where I immediately go is just how do we prioritize? And it sounds like staff will probably be helping to do that and put stuff in front of us. And I think that will be really helpful because, I agree with Councilmember Rivas. There's just so much to do. And then, of course, with almost all of the actions, it's like, okay, and there's a cost to that, and there's a cost to that. And so I think being able to prioritize and figure out what's the low-hanging fruit. I think I saw a community needs assessment, so what will we learn through that and what the community desires. I know one of the guiding principles was best practices from other communities, and so and you mentioned that too, Mayor, just getting a better sense of in our staging, how does that apply to our staging and prioritization? And then the last thing that I would add, I also own an electric car, and we have yet to change to the higher voltage, whatever.
Oh.
Yeah, other people know. I don't know what that means, but and part of it is a cost issue, right? And so I'm thinking about, we have home improvement loans. Are we going to allow people who are lower income who are applying for these loans to be able to use that money to install electric chargers in their homes? And so, and maybe that can then help at least with some of the cost challenges and barriers to owning electric and having an electric car, because I'll tell you what, with the lower voltage or whatever charger, it does take a long time to charge our car, but we just use it for zipping around Bloomington, so not a big deal. But so anyways, again, it's hard for me to say, hey, we should prioritize this or that without having, I guess, some criteria, some more understanding of like what's the low-hanging fruit. And then I would echo just the desire to really partner with other organizations in the business community. I work at an office in Bloomington and park in a parking ramp there, and I'm so surprised that we do not have electric chargers. Mm-hmm. It's really surprising to me at this point. And so working with some of those landowners to figure out how we can incentivize having chargers on site, I think would be really helpful. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Good feedback for you to move forward with?
I think I have a good plan to move forward with, and I appreciate your time and all your guys' thoughts and comments on this. And like I said, we hope to be back here by the end of the month with a final plan for your consideration, and thanks for your time.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mayor.
Councilmember Lohman.
I wanted don't want to stop you here, but we saw a hand that's out there in the audience, but I know that this is a study session, and I know that the council member is next to me asking me about that, and we typically don't take questions from the audience during a study session.
Yes, these organizational business items when we're doing this is basically a presentation by staff with feedback, conversation between the council and the staff, and not necessarily an opportunity as it comes back to us. I'm assuming there will be a public comment opportunity as we work to adopt this plan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I should mention too, we do have a Let's Talk Bloomington page for the EV infrastructure plan out there where you can make comments and contact me. My information's on there. So feel free to provide those through that venue, and I can definitely follow up if there's any additional comments. So,
sounds good. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd also add that we have, since you have 3 guinea pigs up here, at least 3 of us, I know Councilmember Nelson also has an EV, so let us know how we can help you with some of your testing, if that's the case. Jenna and Sean and I will just show up. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Council item 5.4 on our agenda is the appointment of a council member to the Port Authority. So back in January of 2020, Councilmember Carter and I were appointed to the Port Authority, and with the term to end December 31st, 2025. It's a 6-year term. And Councilmember Carter recently reappointed to the HRA Board of Directors and wishes to step aside from the Port Authority, and leaving the vacant unexpired term to last until December 31st, 2025. This is a little bit different than some of our other boards or commissions in that officially this is a mayoral appointment with the consent of the City Council. And that's established by state legislature, Minnesota statutes, and so that's not our choice. That's basically what's in state law. And so, in looking to fill this council seat on the Port Authority, talked to a couple of different council members, had some input, folks who wanted to take part in this. And council, I am going to move forward with the recommendation that we appoint Councilmember Nelson to the Port Authority to fill out this unexpired term for these primary reasons. First of all, his experience on the council, his experience in the building community and the building renovation and restoration community within the Twin Cities, and just his opportunity to bring those 2 pieces onto and add it to the perspective of the city, to the Port Authority right now, and bring it back to the City Council as needed. As I said, I know there were others who were interested. It's no reflection on other folks on the council at all. It's just I think that right now Councilmember Nelson is the best candidate for this position. And so with that, this is a council, as I said, this is a mayor's appointment, and looking for a motion from the board or from the council here to consent to the appointment of Councilmember Nelson to the Port Authority and to a term from the date of appointment through December 31st, 2025. Councilmember Carter.
I would be happy to make that motion.
Councilmember Carter.
So I would move to, well, the language on this is a little bit weird. Consent to the mayor's appointment of Councilmember Nelson to the Port Authority Board of Commissioners to a term from the date of appointment through December 31st, 2025.
Second.
Good. Motion by Councilmember Carter, second by Councilmember Lohman to consent to the mayor's appointment of Councilmember Nelson to the Port Authority. Council, any discussion on this? No council discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. Our final item this evening is, as always, our council policy and issue updates. I'll give a quick recap of our council listening session that happened this evening. We heard from Ms. Sally Ness, who was once again requesting an internal investigation regarding a dispute that involved the Bloomington Police Department, and relayed to her that the matters that she brought up have gone through both the civil litigation and internal affairs investigative processes, and the allegations the allegations she's bringing forward in both of those processes were not found to her favor. She continues to question that and ask about it, but the bottom line is, as we explained, the question was asked and it was answered that the allegations were not, it had gone through the civil litigation and the internal affairs investigative process, and the allegations just weren't moving forward. And as I said, Ms. Ness was our only council listening session attendee this evening. I don't have anything else. Mr. Verbrugge, do you have anything to add this evening?
Mr. Mayor and council members, I do want to just bring your attention to our Friday weekly report, the Bloomington This Week. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, we do have information in there about both the communications and outreach planning and just the timeline around our Bloomington Forward projects, the Bloomington Ice Garden renovation, the 9 Mile Creek restoration project, and the Community Health and Wellness Center. Our team is busy putting together the schedule and what the plan will be for outreach and engagement. We know that a lot of people in the community are tracking these projects closely, will not only want to be informed, but also be providing input into how these projects are shaped and end up serving the community. And I want to make sure that you all see that information and just reassure the public that we are going to move quickly. So I expect by the beginning of February that we will have a pretty fulsome plan for how we move forward, and there will be frequent and vigorous communication with the community.
Councilmember Carter?
Thank you, Mayor. So I have not read that yet, but I did get a call from a resident recently who was just concerned about the offerings at Creekside and what's going to happen to those when their construction starts. And so you don't have to answer anything at this point, but just I'm sure you can provide reassurance that there will be a lot of engagement and communication around that piece too.
Mr. Mayor, council members, Councilmember Carter, you are correct. That is high on the list for our staff who serve our customers and clients and program participants at Creekside, and so they know that there's a lot of interest in that. We'll be working through it.
Council, any additional questions of Mr. Verbrugge this evening? If not, Council, anything to bring forward as part of item 5.5? I see no hands going up, so that means we have completed our agenda this evening, Council. And with that, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember D'Alessandro, second by Councilmember Carter to adjourn this evening's meeting. No further council discussion on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thanks much, Council, for the discussion this evening. Staff, thank you for the presentations and the information provided. Thanks to everybody who watched and participated here in person and online. Thanks much. Have a good rest of your week.